Good morning and welcome to the inaugural Alumni Toolkit webinar. I'm Ramya Acharya, Head of Alumni at Macquarie Business School. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which this university is situated, the Wallumattagal people of the Darug Nation. We pay our respects to the Darug people and to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. As a graduate, you are part of a respected global network of more than 90,000 business alumni. And it's wonderful to have more than 500 alumni joining us today from across Australia and from more than 10 countries across the globe. As COVID-19 impacts people's lives and livelihoods worldwide, we have had to think of new ways to serve and nurture our alumni community. Today's presentation is going to focus on work trends for 2020 and beyond. Our speakers, through their presentation, will explore a range of strategies to build a rewarding career. We are going to learn how we can come back stronger and be ready to thrive after this major disruption. I am delighted to welcome our three wonderful speakers today. After hearing from each of them, there will be a Q&A. You can post questions at any time during the presentation, as well as vote on questions you would like answered. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Tsung Lee, Regional Director of PageGroup. Over to you, Tsung.
Nice to meet you all. My name is Tsung Lee, and I'm one of our leaders here at Michael Page. Just a quick introduction on me. I've been with the business for 13 years and oversee our finance, sales, and legal practice here in Sydney. I also look after our CFO and mid-cap CEO search area. I'm also a father and a failing homeschool teacher of a 6-year-old. So my apologies if he runs into the screen. Thank you to MGSM for the opportunity to share our insights with your alumni. And it's apparent from the questions that were asked of the panelists that everyone's hungry for insights on the job market. So I thought it would be best that I set the tone on what the current market looks like. There's a lot of hope about Scott Morrison's announcement following today's National Cabinet meeting. However, the reality is we're in for a downturn of some form, as you can see there. The general consensus appears to be centered around one question. With COVID-19 restrictions happening globally, can the domestic market compensate for a drop in demand for our services and goods elsewhere? And whilst there isn't a consensus on whether it's a V, U, or L-shaped recovery, the reality is with any downturn, unemployment always lags the recovery. So we need to be prepared to change how we look for a job. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So we had the privilege of hosting a number of economic webinars in April, where we asked over 1,000 business leaders across Australia for their view on the employment market right now. And this is what they told us last month. On the left, we asked simply, are you still hiring? And given the severity of the current challenging economic climate, it was actually assuring to see that 21% of respondents were still hiring or planning to hire in the next 3 months. That was further broken down on the right, where we asked these business leaders, 1,000 business leaders that were hiring in the next 3 months, which sector do you work in? And as you can see, even though many sectors are under pressure, mining services still had the strongest hiring intentions by some margin, followed by infrastructure, manufacturing, IT, healthcare, and medical, which I believe is no surprise to many on this call. On to the next slide. We asked those same business leaders what their biggest challenge was as a business. And you can see on the left that COVID-19 has impacted businesses very differently. The biggest challenge it has posed relates to leading teams and people, where almost 500 of those leaders reported this as their biggest pain point. Close to a quarter of them felt that interacting with customers and partners were their biggest challenge. And on the right, we asked them, what courses of action are they taking? More than half of them are increasing their dialogue with their customers or partners and are trying to improve their processes. Interestingly, if you can see at the bottom, training and development is the least popular response, suggesting that businesses lack the bandwidth or resources at this time for such initiatives. So if you're looking for a role and you have these skills that could benefit these businesses, you are in a favorable position. A number of multinationals, so if we're talking about trends that we're seeing offshore, certain parts of their businesses to shared services or BPOs based in India or parts of Asia. Some of these countries have been hit extremely hard by COVID-19 or don't have the IT infrastructure support. So we're seeing some roles come back and they may stay back for a long time. L&D for most organizations is being recorded or provided over webinar. And this was a trend we were seeing before. Now it might be here to stay. Working from home. This is a hot topic for a lot of our leaders out there. It was a fine balance between trust, empowerment, control, and understanding. And it was an exception more than the rule. However, we were all forced to work from home. People are starting to find their rhythm after 9 weeks. So working from home might be permanently incorporated into people's routines moving forward. And trends that were happening before COVID-19 are now escalated. I'll give you an example. One of the retailers that we work with realized their call center volumes were already in decline, which was based offshore. They've now pivoted their retail staff who have been stood down, reskilled them via virtual training, and then taught them how to interact with their customers via chatbots, right? It appears people prefer to chat over speaking on the phone, which is no surprise to people. On to the next slide. So which roles are we seeing that will experience growth in 2020? Nice to have transformation has been put on the back burner, but we have seen a sharp increase in critical project improvement. So for example, the banking sector is still very busy with regulatory compliance and risk improvements. Corporates are still upgrading their technology to give them an edge. We as a business have received multiple tenders for project roles around critical business improvement, even in the last month. Legal, as you can imagine, has increased. So I read an article which said Google search trends have shown a spike for force majeure, unforeseeable circumstances that prevent someone from fulfilling a contract in the last month. Legal battles are popping up everywhere. We've seen an increase in restructuring and insolvency type lawyers. So that's a great opportunity for graduate lawyers to hone their skills in insolvency as opposed to corporate finance, which could be a more desired skill in future. E-commerce, it's fairly self-explanatory with the shift in human behavior. I, for one, finally bought furniture online for the first time. That was an experience. And marketing and digital. So we're seeing an increase in digital roles. Blended roles seem to be on the rise, but there's a sharp decrease in traditional marketing roles, right? Not sure why, but we'll get to it in a few months. Technology, I mean, the list of jobs in technology continues to evolve. AI, machine learning, data science, cybersecurity, developers, software engineering. So if you're in IT, you're in a good place. Supply chain, a lot of companies have been caught out in the crisis due to supply chain issues. We've had a bunch of retailers actually come to us asking us for help in getting their product from their distribution centers to the shops and even helping put their products on the shelves because they could not keep up with the demand. So supply chain is in demand, but anything related to supply chain is also in demand. We've seen an increase in procurement, finance, IT, demand planning. So what should we do as job seekers in this environment? Agile and nimble are words that will stay in the market for a long time. Every brief we're receiving seems to be coming up with these two words. So people ask me, how do you demonstrate that on your resume? And I'll answer that with, have you put up your hand for a project at work? Are you leading a transformation? Have you mentioned your secondments that you've been on before? Where have you gone above and beyond in your role? There are plenty of ways to demonstrate agility and being nimble without putting those words on your resume. The next one, fairly simple. However, I'll say spend less time on your cover letter and put more quality detail in your resume. And my biggest tip for everyone here is write your own resume from scratch. Too many people have the same resume from 20 years ago, which was a template they probably borrowed from a friend back at uni, probably MGSM. They add a bit to it every single year. And as a recruiter, we can tell, we have seen your templates before. So please write your own resumes. And just for time, I'll probably go to my networking comment. A lot of people ask me, how do you engage your network? What does that mean? And I have a simple framework for anyone who has worked for a few years. Write down a list of names with the people above you, previous bosses, more senior stakeholders, board members. Then write a list of your peers, colleagues that you've lost touch with. Then also write a list of people who have worked for you before and have moved on from your current business. Once you have that list, get your message right on why you're looking to engage with them. It could be for advice. It could be to learn more about their business. It could be for a coffee over Zoom, and engage. And finally, if you're not online on LinkedIn, it's almost as if you do not exist. So get your profile updated. Next slide. So how do recruiters identify a good CV? Here is a simple framework. We actually provide internal recruiters on how to better identify a good CV. So I'm sharing this with you to help all of you here. As someone who is writing a resume, you should be asking yourself these questions on the right, because they are the questions that they'll be asking when they see your resume. On to the next slide. So conscious of time here, I'll only highlight a few points, but contracting, there's been a sharp increase in contract and temporary roles, so be flexible. I know you want a permanent job. Everyone wants a permanent job, but there are a lot of contracting opportunities out there. On the right, when I say play the long game, you may not get the dream job straight away in this market. That's the reality. So focus maybe on the dream business. Get yourself a foot in the door first and work your way to that job that you want. And finally, I just want to say you may need to adapt and accept that there'll be more rejection than you have ever faced before. Making 10 to 20 quality applications isn't enough in this environment. You need to make more and face rejection. On to the next slide. So a question asked of me was, which industries should you focus on? And I'm sharing the industries that said they were still recruiting from before. So there you go. That one's free. Other tips are focus on businesses that are in a great financial position and that are already embracing technology and themselves have a long-term view on the market. So just talking about two example businesses, Sanofi and Alibaba, two businesses that used downturns to invest in the right way and grew. Alibaba used SaaS to get them back on the path, and Sanofi actually used R&D to keep their pipeline going, and they outperformed their peers before a takeover. So if you're looking for which sort of business should you be targeting, it's not just someone who's hiring, it's companies that are growing and will continue to grow. And on to the final slide for me. I think I've summed up most of these points, but if there's two things that I want to highlight, it's find those agencies that are still recruiting in this market. Everyone is still recruiting. It might not be the volume, but there are a lot of jobs out there. And the first one I think is extremely important. Be polite and respectful in your approaches to anyone on LinkedIn, whether it be head of talent or hiring managers or CEOs, and especially now be patient for a response. People are inundated with responses. I've had a CEO job that went on hold because of COVID-19, and I've had 480 applications. So I'm trying my best to get back to everyone. However, it will take time. And I think that's it from me. I hope you found that insightful. I'm ready for your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you for that insightful presentation, Tsung. I hear that remote work is the future of work, and the 9-to-5 era is fading away. Companies are making remote work easier, more productive, and more possible. We just need to be able to adapt and be agile. In my observation, the gig economy is winning. Gig workers do their own thing and have a side hustle. Data shows that a large proportion of workforce will freelance to some degree in the next 10 years. This is our time to awaken and rebuild ourselves. So we will come back to Tsung for questions during Q&A. Now let's turn the time over to our next presenter, Sinead Connolly, co-founder and director, Lotus People. Junaid is going to talk about a range of job search strategies. But to begin with, Junaid, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much to you, and thank you to everyone for having me here today. So my name is Sinead Connolly. I co-found and run Lotus People. My background is I graduated from my business school in university in Ireland about 10 years ago and moved out to Australia, where I started working in recruitment then. I decided to set up my own agency 5 years ago, and I really wanted to bring a genuine candidate-focused agency to the market. So it's something I'm extremely passionate about, and I am really looking forward to kind of sharing my insights today. I've recruited for hundreds of businesses over the last few years, and that covers everything from SMEs all the way through to big globals. So as well as that, of course, sticking close to the market in the last 6 weeks, and exactly as Tsung covered, very aware of everything and all the trends and everything that's happening. So I think Tsung spoke a lot about the macro view and the trends and what the market's doing. And I'm going to really hone in a little bit more on your specific job search and what you can be doing to put the best foot forward. So starting off with cover letters and resumes, look, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here. It is quite obvious, but it also is worth mentioning. And I know Tsung has touched on it too, but it is so, so important. If you think about the amount of time that people spend, whether it's recruiters, whether it's hiring managers, the amount of time that they spend on looking at your resume, it honestly comes down to seconds. So it's just crucial that your information is in chronological order. It's easy to read. And another thing that's really worth mentioning here that I don't know if everyone is aware of, but for big businesses and recruitment agencies, we are capturing thousands of resumes a week. We have databases of hundreds of thousands of candidates. So it is really important not to focus on soft skills in your resume, but to really focus on the systems that you've used, the skills that you've picked up, the environments you've been in, anything that will be searchable. When a recruiter wants to find you or a head of talent wants to find you, you want to be easily found. So really think about that. Don't think about someone spending kind of 5 minutes reading your resume, because it's just unlikely. It's really going to be that they have a lot less time. So just keep that front of mind. And also it's worth mentioning that your resume should tell a story. If you have had a couple of years out for travel or to have a family, just include it. Include that information, because if there's any question marks, if someone looks at your resume and thinks, oh, I don't quite know what happened there, you won't get any further opportunity to answer those questions. So that is really important. Next slide, please. So what are employers looking for pre-interview? Again, this is kind of covering off what I've just touched on. The keywords piece is essential as we track into a new era of AI and technology. Businesses and recruitment agencies are utilizing this technology to pull up candidate information. So again, just reinforcing the importance of those keywords. And with regards to culture fit, this is just something to touch on, because with the rise of fintechs and tech businesses and kind of this new way of working and these new businesses, their cultures are entirely different to more corporate businesses, to banks, to management consultancies. So you want your resume to have personality and to really look like it's targeted to the business you're applying for. That same resume and cover letter won't do. Whilst you might be able to work in both of those sectors, that won't do for both of those sectors. And digital footprint, Google yourself. This is a quick one and an easy one, but Google yourself and make sure that even with your profile pictures, that they are appropriate. I can't tell you how many resumes that I've seen come through, and because of our tracking system, it pulls information from people's Facebook. And I have seen so many pictures with kind of vodka bottles and glasses of wine, and it's just not appropriate. So just make sure you're on the highest level of security. Next slide. So networking, look, this is something that Tsung touched on, and I think it's worth reiterating because it is so important, and thinking about what we can be doing now. I've mentioned there, know your strengths. Go onto this website, we'll include this afterwards, but understanding this is a time now where you can really get to grips with your self-awareness and your personal development, understanding what you're good at, understanding where your strengths lie will really help to refine and define your job search, and it will impact that. With networks, I think if all of us think about networking, I often think about walking into a room with 100 people and interrupting conversations to hand over my business card. And I hate that. Although I'm in a people-focused business, it's just not how I operate, and it's not something I enjoy. I think with networking, speaking to the examples that Tsung gave, really thinking about who do you know, who can you kind of tap into in the network that you have already, but also in thinking about your strengths. If you are more introverted in your way, you might like to sit down and spend a kind of a day or a few hours on LinkedIn, really mapping out your networks that way. But it is really important. I mentioned before that I came out here 10 years ago. I didn't know anyone. I'm from Ireland. All of my networks are in Ireland. However, when I got here, I became involved naturally with the Irish Australian Chamber of Commerce. I got involved with Business Chicks, and over the years, the most incredible relationships have formed. And on the back of that, I've had a number of business opportunities and a number of opportunities that have come my way. I think the most important thing to note with networking is to be authentic. Networking isn't something where you force yourself on someone and say, hi, you work here and I want to be involved in that. It has to come from an authentic place. And again, tying in with your strengths, understanding yourself, understanding your authenticity, and being genuine in how you approach that is going to be really important. Again, speaking about recruitment agencies, I think it's just worth noting quickly that utilizing a recruitment agency to your advantage is the best thing you can do for your career. It really is. Recruitment agencies, there's obviously a lot out there, but if you can find ones that have your back, that can provide insight to the market, and you have built that relationship with, you really will get access to a lot more opportunity and job opportunities than you would have otherwise. So things to avoid and things to do with interviewing. And look, again, I don't want to be too kind of obvious, but the preparation piece is key. I think that you need to seem interested. Businesses want you, they are gunning for you in interview, and they want you to do well. It makes their lives easier if they've met the person who's perfect for the job. So do your research. Your questions that you ask, the information you prepare in advance is going to be really important. And again, touching on culture fit, we see this all the time. I can't tell you how many calls I've had from companies that have said, oh God, we had someone come into our tech business and they were wearing a suit. And whilst that might not seem like the biggest deal for tech companies, someone walking in a suit to interview is an absolute no-no. So things like that, it's just really important to be aware of the environment that you're walking into. I've also mentioned there, know what you're walking into. And on that note, if you're interviewing through a recruitment agency, and even if you're interviewing directly with and you've liaised with a HR contact, ask for as much information as possible. So they should be able to tell you how formal is this meeting going to be? What is the agenda? Will there be anybody else in the meeting? What should I prepare? If you're not going into an interview knowing that much information, then you either need to kind of feed back to your recruiter, or you need to speak to the head of HR or whoever it is you're dealing with to have that info. It really will help you put the best foot forward. Next slide, thanks. So what you can be doing right now, I saw on the poll that a number of you are out of work at the moment. And whilst, of course, there is so much stress and uncertainty around the job market and around everything that's going on, there is also silver linings, and there's a lot of time and space to be able to really focus on what you do next. So creating a job search strategy, I think this is the most important thing that you can do. Take the driver's seat. I think everyone needs to go away who's looking for work and think, similar to what Tsung said, what are the 10 companies I want to work at? What are the 15? Be realistic. I think people often choose Google and Netflix and all of these exciting businesses, but realistically, what kind of company can you see yourself working in? Go on LinkedIn, understand the structure of those businesses, look at the roles. You can jump on any company and you can look at their people through LinkedIn's website, and you can see the roles that people in the business hold and see if you can picture yourself in any of them. And if so, again, as Tsung said, play the long game, but also put yourself on the radar, reach out to head of talent, reach out to head of HR, reach out to the appropriate people, and just start chipping away at building that relationship. And that ties in with your personal brand. I mean, branding and personal branding is a whole nother topic. There's a lot of information around this, but I think it's really essential that everyone is aware that how they are perceived online and how they build up their own brand when looking for work is really crucial. Be tailored and specific in the companies you follow on LinkedIn, the information you put out there, the information you share, the articles you share. Again, use it as a real point to stand out and almost to become a thought leader in the area that you're working in. And of course, sharpening the sword. I know that it's an opportunity to upskill for many people. So that's definitely going to be something that you can decide if it's relevant for your career. Understanding your market and kind of building connections within your market. That again ties in with what I said about LinkedIn. I think that LinkedIn is a good platform to use, but it might not be the best one for you. Again, figure out where you want to be and where those people are. And next slide. So yeah, what we're seeing with new hires, look, I think there is a lot of uncertainty in the market at the moment, but exactly as Tsung said, businesses are still hiring. Obviously, there's certain industries that are going to be booming and others that are going to be struggling. And of course, businesses that I've seen in the last 6 weeks are adapting to remote recruitment, remote onboarding, and they're figuring it out. They're making it happen. The one thing I just want to leave everyone on is with regards to temporary and contract roles. No matter, we don't know, we can't predict what's going to happen. So no matter what happens in the next 18 months, you can be guaranteed that in a time of uncertainty and in a potential recession, businesses will lean heavily on temporary and contract roles. So if this isn't something you've considered before, I would suggest speaking to your recruiters, speaking to the people, the businesses you're in contact with, and really suggest that you are open to contract roles. And I think that's everything from me. I hope that helped. And again, we can answer questions at the end.
Oh, wow, Junaid, that's a lot of criteria and layers of scrutiny our job seekers go under. So job seekers out there, no pressure at all. I do have a question for you on culture fit that you touched on in your presentation, but I will save it for later. So thank you very much. That was very, very insightful. Our final speaker today is one of our very own business school alumni, graduating with the Bachelor of Commerce in 2012, Amanda Bertus, staffing partner at Google. The webinar is all yours, Amanda.
Thanks, Ramya. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda. I'm excited to be able to speak with you all today, albeit from afar. So as Ramya said, I graduated in 2013 from Macquarie University. So this is a huge 360 moment for me, and I'm really excited to be able to share some of my insights. So with the 10 minutes that I have with you, I'm going to focus on some of the things that I've learned through my journey from being a Macquarie graduate and then all the way to my current role at Google, where I work in the talent acquisition space. So I'll touch on a couple of things and focus on the insights that I've gained by working in talent acquisition, but also I'll try to tie in some of my own experiences. Great, so we're already on the slide that I want to be on. Starting with respecting opportunity. So I think that this is exceptionally important in our current world, right? Regardless of whether you're still at university or you're a new grad or you've had to re-enter the employment market because of external factors, I think the key is that this is the time to respect every and any opportunity. If you're currently in the workforce, I'd be encouraging you to think of ways to add value It's the time to be demonstrating your worth and usefulness. So think of some projects or even tasks that you can take on to really demonstrate that added value. The second point is around things being figure-outable, and I actually borrowed this from a book titled Everything is Figure-Outable by Marie Forleo. If the title strikes your interest, I do recommend you read it, or at least try to listen to her speak. She's exceptionally motivational just on all aspects of life. I wanted to include this in my presentation because it is true that we're all dealing with external factors that are completely out of our control and quite scary, to be frank. So it's important to keep ourselves motivated and realize that we do have infinite capability and that this too is figure-outable if we put in the right inputs. And I think that Sinead and Tsung touched on some amazing points and tips and actionable actions that we can take to figure this out. And my last point on this slide is around actually landing your dream job or the job before your dream job. I can't agree more with what Junaid said around focusing on trying to get into the job market, right? You will work your way up, but at this point, I think focus on trying to get your foot in the door. So to me, it's a combination of skill and grit. Skill to me is what you gain through education and experience, right? So we're all very lucky to be studying at Macquarie or to have graduated from Macquarie. Think about the lessons and the teachings and the skills that you've gained through your education and make sure that that's ongoing, right? So it doesn't just stop at your undergrad. Think about ways to build on that. And that could be watching something on YouTube that's gonna give you an additional skill. And then grit is something that's really important, in my humble opinion, to be able to get yourself into the right rooms. And I'd like to humbly share the moment in my life that this really became clear to me. So getting into the workforce in Australia was quite challenging for me. I was an international student, and hand on heart, my grades weren't phenomenal. So I had to really respect every and any opportunity that came my way. And I took a role recruiting security and fire professionals in the basement of the owner of this recruitment agency's home, right? So I was literally underground in every sense of the word. And cold calling companies and candidates in an industry that I knew nothing about to create leads. Nothing about this was easy. It was really hard. I was being hung up on numerous times every day, but I kept going because I was focused on figuring things out and respecting my opportunities and gaining skills. So for me, this wasn't my dream job, but it was definitely the job before the job that got me my dream job at Google. And for that reason, you could argue that it was probably the most important role that I've had in my career so far. I learned what it is to have grit. And because of the sales nature of the role, I really learned what it meant to be rejected on a daily basis, which takes me to my next slide. So how do you get feedback if you are unsuccessful? And like Tsung and Sinead alluded to, rejection is part of the process. In fact, if you're not being rejected, you're probably not trying hard enough, right? So embrace that because you're gaining grit through every rejection and you need that to be successful. So a couple of my points here. Try to get feedback before the first interview. You don't need to wait till the end, then start trying to build rapport with a recruiter. You can ask questions like, based on my CV, do you foresee any gaps or any concerns that I can bridge in my preparation, right? This then gives you that edge and you can focus your prep on building that skill gap. Secondly, be professionally persistent. Like Sinead alluded to in her presentation, you've got to follow up. You are in charge of your career and there's only one of you to look after, whereas a recruiter will have hundreds of you in their pipelines. So follow up with an email. Think about what's in it for the employer as well and lead with a hook, right? So instead of just saying, hey, can I have my feedback? Maybe you have a competing offer and you need to create some urgency. Because your feedback on this particular interview is going to help you decide which opportunity you're going to pursue. Try not to be a stalker, right? So there's a fine line between being professionally persistent and being a stalker, and I trust that we all have the emotional intelligence to figure that out, but really think about that. And then finally, leave every interaction on a positive note. I can't stress this enough. This can either make or break your chances for future employment in the company. So think about the way that you're representing yourself. Think about the brand that you're building. I can't tell you the number of times we've had a candidate who may not have been successful for the role at hand, but we had every intention to tap them up for a similar role or a role down the line. And because of the way that they've reacted to an update, we've either had to change our strategy or confirm that they are for sure the person that we want to reach out to. And this is because you're being assessed every step of the way, right? And we're looking for things like resilience. In today's world, you need to be comfortable with rejection. You need to be calm under pressure. So don't burn any bridges and be graceful and gracious. Next slide, please. Right, so I think we've all established that we're in a VUCA world. And if you're not familiar with the acronym VUCA, I do recommend you Google it, or you can Bing it. Just look it up. It's an interesting way to view the employment world that we're living in currently. So how can we be resourceful? And Sung and Sinead did touch on a couple of these points, so I won't repeat the points on CV and our online identity to be respectful of time, but just to summarize, think about readability, think about consistency, and think about your format, right? Do not use a photo of you 3 hours into a board party that you went to 5 years ago on your LinkedIn profile. It's not going to help you. And any good recruiter isn't going to rule you out because of that, but it's not helping your cause. And I think that right now we all need to be doing whatever we can to help ourselves get through the recruitment funnel. So focus on what you can control. Preparation is key. Prep isn't just based on how you answer an interview question, but it's also your knowledge of the industry and the company that you're interviewing for, right? So think about things like their strategic objectives, their culture, right? What are their values and what are their plans for the future? You need to be an expert on this. I would go so far as to say, if you're not prepared, don't pick up the call because you're going to waste an opportunity. It's better to revisit your prep and then try scheduling a phone screen or an interview when you're ready. My next point is around building and leveraging your network. If you can get referred into a company, you might have a little bit of a competitive advantage, right? So think about who you know, think about colleagues, bosses, old bosses, friends that you might know in the industries of the companies that you're interested in, and make sure that you reach out to them. In my experience, people have always been more helpful than not. And of course, you're going to reach out to people that might be really busy or something's going on in their personal life and they're not ready to have a virtual coffee with you, but try. Make sure that you're putting these inputs in before you start the employment search or the interview process. And then my final slide is around knowing your resources. There's a lot out there, and in fact, the uniqueness of this global crisis that we're in because of this pandemic is that it is happening in a digital world. So there's still a lot that we can control, and there's a lot that we can use to be resourceful. So I put in some stuff on here that I've used personally in the hopes that it helps you. I love Canva for templates for CVs. Personally, I don't have the best attention to detail, so I like the fact that there's a template that I can then go in and of course tweak and tailor to suit my skill set. Google Garage, phenomenal if you're looking for bite-sized skills on a particular area. YouTube is great if you want some prep on how to answer interview questions, as you think about frameworks like the STAR framework, for example. And then finally, LinkedIn Learning as well. I recently did a course on executive presence on LinkedIn Learning that actually helped me a lot in my prep for this particular presentation. So look, in closing, I know that we've all given you a lot of tips. I would challenge you to think of one thing that you're going to take away, and it might be as simple as you're going to ask a friend to look through your CV to double check for consistency and format, right? Start small, but focus on the actionable items. And I would recommend that you do that today. It's a Friday, it's a great day for it. So try to have an impact based on what we've discussed today. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed speaking to you. I hope it's been valuable, and I wish you the best with all your endeavors.
Thank you, Amanda, for all your practical advice and sharing your personal experience from being an international student to now working at Google. In the new era of remote work, BYO devices, gig workers, and all the rest of it, big businesses will sweep the agile workforce if you don't keep up with the changes. The impact of COVID-19 is going to radically change the businesses and their workforce needs, so we need to get prepared. On behalf of all our attendees today, I would like to say a big thank you to our speakers for sharing their insights and advice with us. We have some great questions that have been sent through. If you haven't had a chance yet, please post your question through the Q&A function and like the questions you want to hear the answers to. I have a question for each of the panelists, and then we'll move to questions from our audience. Tsung, if you think your workplace may start cutting roles, what are some key things you can do to be retained?
Yeah, good question. And also, I just want to say thank you, Amanda, for sharing so honestly. I thought I was the only recruiter with bad grades, but good to know there's someone else there with me. So what should you do if your business is cutting roles? What can you do to be retained? Be proactive. Don't wait for the news to come. Yeah, we all talked about attitude, mindset, and being proactive. Now is the time to engage with your leader about what else you can do to help in this crisis. So attitude and resilience are key factors leaders are using to decide on who they should cut in this environment. So that is demonstrating you are nimble and agile, and you're bringing a growth mindset in tough times. So be proactive.
That's great. Sinead, next up, what are some of the indicators employers are looking for to decide if you're a good fit for the organization? You mentioned a lot about the cultural fit. So what really are employers looking for at an interview to sign off that you're a good fit for the organization?
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's a great question, but I think the number one thing in my experience in working so closely with so many businesses who are hiring, the number one thing that businesses look for is coachability. How fast can people learn on the job? You can be a culture fit, you can have all of the right experience, but if somebody comes into a role and is kind of, I guess, slow to pick things up or not fully getting it, that can be a frustration and it can be a difficult thing. So I think the one thing that people can really do to put their foot forward is in interview, demonstrate how in the past you've learned quickly and you've picked things up quickly. And that coachability, if you keep that in mind as you're interviewing and as you're going for new roles, that being communicated through to people who are interviewing, that will really stand you out.
So that's a quick learner there. Finally, you, Amanda, what are the most common mistakes you see with job applications and how can they be avoided?
I think there's a couple of things that are really easy to fix. And the first one is around your tailoring your application. We can tell when you've used the same CV to apply to 50 different jobs, right? Think about tailoring it to each company because it shows that you care and it shows that you're really thoughtful about the process. And I think the other thing is around consistency and format. I know it's not a super glamorous thing, but decide if you're going to go with full stops or not, right? And it doesn't mean that your ability to go with a full stop or not at the end of every sentence means you can do the job, but it shows that you care, it shows you have attention to detail, and it shows that you're thoughtful. So I think overall, the best way to sense check this is to just get a friend to review your CV and double check some of those things.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask the first question with 14 likes on the Q&A window from Daniel Holloway. Resumes should include detail of what you've achieved and quantifying that where possible. Yet we're also advised to keep it short and punchy. How to strike a balance? Can I ask this question to Junaid?
Sorry. Yes, it's a really good question. I think the answer to that it's straightforward. I would keep it to 2 or 3 pages. I think no matter how long you've had in your career, 3 pages is a good size for a resume. If we're ticking into 5, 6 pages, it's too long. But I can see when people have been told they should have a 1-page resume and it's too short. It's not enough. There isn't any strict length that resumes should be, but if you kept it at around 3 pages, then it would allow you to convey a lot of information, and include the information that you need to include, but without kind of having it be too long and including unnecessary info.
Great. The next question might be for Amanda. It's just a clarification from Adriana. Do you want us to follow up once we send our resume in or after an interview?
Yep, that's a really good question, Adriana, and I think it strikes that balance between being professionally persistent and being a bit of a stalker. So I think I think for me personally, it would be after you've done your first interview. After any verbal communication, I just follow up with a short email, just thanking the interviewer for their time and maybe asking a question on when you can expect to hear back, because then you've got an in and you're able to follow up on that email chain. It's also a lot easier than for recruiters to search you in their inboxes. So yes, I'd wait for after your first phone screen or first interview. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Amanda. Tsung, this question is for you. So is there any study or information about how COVID-19 crisis will affect the recruiting scenario for international students or graduates?
Yeah, great question. The reality is there are studies coming out on how this is impacting employment, but as we all shared, it's changing every single week. So whatever we publish this week, next week, I'm sure there's something else that's coming out. The reality is corporates will still be hiring graduates, perhaps less volume than they have before. So it's extremely important that if you're a graduate, you need to make sure you're standing out with a great resume. And that just doesn't matter whether you're an international student or a local student, you need to stand out. Right now, there was one big multinational we were discussing what a grad program would look like. So corporates are thinking, well, how do we get graduates to help us through this crisis?
Great, thank you. Next question is how to overcome being considered overqualified for a job, and should I think twice before taking a job below my skill level in the current climate? Junaid, would you like to take that one?
For sure. Look, it's a really, really good question, and it doesn't actually have a direct answer. I know that from my personal experience, I've had friends who have been overqualified, taken some older roles off their resume or extra degrees off their resume and have had more calls. So it's a difficult one. However, I think my advice in this market is that if you can secure a role, if you can take something that is below your level, perhaps on a contract basis, then I would recommend doing it, because it's still within that, as Tsung said earlier, you can create a good impression, you can create opportunities for yourself, and there will be more of a chance that within a business you can progress than outside a business trying to kind of get in a difficult market.
Great, thank you, Junaid. And Amanda, any advice for people who were stood down?
Yeah, and happy for my co-panelists to jump in as well on this one. But I think what I would do is think about my LinkedIn and make sure that it's switched on to interested in opportunities, because that way recruiters will know that you're looking for work and will be able to reach out to you quicker. And a lot of the other things that we talked about, brush up your digital footprint. Make sure that you're doing your research online in terms of jobs that are open and industries that are still recruiting, and then I would also be brushing up your CV to tell an accurate story of your current situation.
Great. Sinead, have you got any other comments on that one?
No, I agree.
Great. Let's move on. This question might be for Tsung. Interested in how to best answer STAR questions for a telco interview. Should it be aligned to what the client seeks or your actual experience as key focus?
Good question. Not sure about specific telco interviews, but how to best answer STAR questions. So that's situation, task, action, result. The best way to answer that is actually with your experience. Yeah, you don't want to make up your experience. However, you do want to relate that situation to the problem or the question that the client is asking. So even though you might not have exactly what the client is asking for, you've probably demonstrated something similar in the past before. So that's how I'd answer it.
Okay, great, thank you. This is an interesting question. Is it necessary to provide your age in your resume? What do you think about it, Junaid?
Look, it's not necessary. I actually do advise people who have their date of birth on their resume to remove it. I think I see there's another question about ageism as well. I just think that if you have your date of birth on there, it just gives more information to people, and there could be some kind of unconscious bias. However, even if it's not conscious, however, no, I don't think you need to provide it. I think what I prefer is to see resumes that I can see kind of when, how much experience someone has, and you can kind of get an idea of their seniority, but it doesn't factor, age shouldn't be factored in. And I don't think giving people that information is helpful.
Yeah.
Would you agree to that, Tsung?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree to that. And I'd probably add, we see many things on people's resumes. Like I've seen body fat percentage, like some strength, hobbies, trumpet champions, whatever. And I say keep it relevant in terms of the detail, because there are people with an unconscious bias, like what Sinead shared, but also share detail if you think it's relevant to the business. So I see a lot of people sharing their pets, their hobbies, but if you're applying for a pet food business, that's highly relevant. So make sure it's relevant information.
Great. So I think the questions here is about interview tips, or, how really to approach employers during an interview. What are the top 3 things you would say would be that you need to keep in mind during an interview? Amanda, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think, it sounds like it's when you're in the interview, how do you maybe communicate the employer, communicate with the employer? And I think the big thing for me in my experience is you need to be flexible, because it really depends on the company that you're interviewing with, right? If it's a tech firm, you might have a more casual approach, but if you're going for an accounting role in one of the big 4, maybe not. I think the key is preparation, right? So look up who you're meeting before you meet them, look them up on LinkedIn, get a sense of who they are as a professional, and then adapt your style. I think if you're prepared, then the way in which you answer your questions will hold a lot more credibility.
That's amazing. So how can a fresh graduate with no prior experience get ahead and compete with people with work experience? Sinead, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that attitude is everything. And I think that if you have somebody in an interview process who has 3 years experience, or a fresh graduate who has the right attitude, that will go so much further. Businesses hire on attitude, and the way we've covered off a lot of ways to show that you have a good attitude and to show your drive within a recruitment process. But the ways to do that would be exactly as Amanda said, to send a follow-up email after the phone call, send a follow-up email after the interview, send a really specific, tailored cover letter that really demonstrates your eagerness, because businesses want that loyalty, that commitment, they want that passion in their business. And so, yeah, I think that's really the best approach.
Great. Tsung, there's a very interesting question here for you. Is there a service provider that allows to independently have assessed what our digital footprints look like to recruiters?
There are plenty of service providers out there that are offering these services. I heard yesterday that someone was charging $2,500 to help someone work on their LinkedIn and their resume. And I was like, I'll help you do that for free. So there are a lot of independent service providers, but I think Sinead and Amanda mentioned this before. It is as simple as Googling it yourself or finding a template that works and doing that almost the hard way, but it pays off in the long run. So I personally don't recommend that. I don't recommend you paying for that because there are things you can do on your own.
Excellent. We may have time for a couple of more questions, and I've got another question from Gianni here. If I do a LinkedIn course online, such as a certificate of project management practitioner, how do I best present this in my CV, and is it under qualification, technical or vocational learning? Sinead, would you like to comment on that one?
For sure. Look, I would just say add it to qualifications. It doesn't need to be that you go so granular with the different levels of education that you have. If you have your education and qualifications and state your degree, state your additional certs, as long as you write that it's a certificate, then anyone who's reviewing your CV will understand the level of the qualification. So my personal thoughts are include it all in qualifications.
Okay. What has changed in terms of the channels that the recruiters are using for recruitment as a result of COVID? Tsung, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I think I mentioned it before, but onboarding has changed in terms of we're working more with companies that were already ready with a virtual onboarding scheme, whereas there are a lot of companies that weren't prepared and are scrambling to get themselves ready. What else? A lot of interviewing via online, via video. So there are some companies that just weren't prepared for video interviewing. And for us, it's actually been quite interesting. We've had to educate these businesses on how to interview better over online, both candidates as well as clients. So that's the evolution of recruitment in this market.
Right. How long do we wait until we write the follow-up email? Amanda, would you like to take that one, please?
Yeah, sure. I love follow-up emails. I think straight after your interview, when it's fresh in everybody's memory, follow up with a quick email. You might have the contact of the recruiter and not the interviewer, but do that. When I was interviewing for Google, I actually followed up on LinkedIn. I wrote to the person that was interviewing me and said, thank you for your time. She never got back to me, but I put it out there.
Great. I think this question might relate to a number of our alumni who might have taken a gap year or who might have gone on maternity. And, you know, with regards to the gap in your resume, how much detail is best to share on the resume when you have been away from work for a year and there is a genuine reason why you were away? Junaid, any comments?
Yes, look, I think keep it very brief. I think at the resume stage, it is totally sufficient to say traveling. And when you get to the stage of interviewing with the recruiter or your first interview, you can really nut into that and your reasons for why you did it and really kind of speak to your story more. But in the first instance, I think you don't want to include too much information.
Great. What do employees look first in a CV? I think we've covered this a fair bit, but does one of you want to just sum it up? Tsung, do you want to go for that?
Yeah, everything that's relevant in terms of detail. So, yeah.
Okay. I agree.
We are just about time, so this will be our last question. What is the best way to build relationships with recruiters so that we can stand out and be put first for jobs? I have found that many recruiters, it's easy for us to fall by the wayside after a few initial emails. Sinead, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, and it's a really good question. And I think the main thing I can say to everyone about this, because as I said in my presentation, I think it's important to build those relationships. You need to be targeted with the recruitment agencies that you approach. And even within that, the consultants that you approach within a recruitment agency. So for example, I can't even tell you how many people come to me with their IT experience, their finance experience, and I don't recruit in those sectors. And whilst I am and I run a very candidate focused agency, it's just not feasible or possible to work with people who I know I can never place in a role. So the best research that I would suggest doing is really understanding the roles you're going to be going for, and then figuring out the consultants in your space. And consultants will be split by temp versus perm consultants, They're sometimes split by geography, sometimes split by the verticals they recruit in, the industries. So understand, all of that info is online, understand who's going to be best, and then make that approach to them, knowing that you're going to be a good candidate for them, and then it can be a mutual and two-way relationship.
It's amazing. I think it's about time that we have to wrap up. I'd like to say a big thank you again to all our wonderful speakers here today. So that concludes our webinar today, the first in a series of 4 webinars designed to help our alumni gain valuable insights to develop your career. Over the coming weeks and months, we'll be announcing further initiatives and programs to support you during these challenging times. You will receive a copy of the webinar, and I really encourage you to share your thoughts and ideas around what we can do to support you. Thank you once again, and stay safe.